Welcome to the Huddle Within podcast, where we go beyond the surface to uncover the real impact of sports in our lives. Whether it's lessons of resilience, the passion that fuels us, or the stories that connect us all. This is where the game gets personal. I am Daniel, a regular sports fan like you, and together we'll explore what sports truly means beyond the surface. So step right into the huddle and let's get into it. What is going, everybody, and welcome to the third episode of the Huddle Within podcast. If it's the third episode you've tuned into, I really appreciate you for getting this far, to be honest, and I hope you've been enjoying the content so far. The first two episodes, one being the introduction and two going into like kind of the deep levels of athletes being humans like us. This one, as you can tell from the title of the episode, is going to be a little bit of a more fun experience one, tying into kind of my personal life and how I got into, I guess, certain sports as I got older, such as basketball, NFL, etc. So it's going to be 5 ways to learn and get into any new sport. And I guess we're obviously not going to cover watching the sport professionally and knowing the rules, because I'm pretty sure most of you will understand all the rules or learn basically the basics. But if not, that would be the first thing to do. Obviously, understand what sport you're going to get into and the rules that are concerned with that. But we're going to give 5 tips that I used getting into NBA and the NFL, and 5 tips that I would highly suggest you guys get into it, because I'm sure you want to get into the sports, but you really, really want to invest yourself into it. And if you're someone that looks into the depths of sports and looks at it beyond, I guess, the lines of the wins and losses, and you really want to get into a kind of those deep conversations into any sport, then this is something that's probably really valuable for you. In saying that, before we get started again, make sure to tune into the previous episodes and always like, subscribe, keep a comment down below if there's anything you want me to talk about, if there's any topics that is gauging your interest. And I also mentioned 2 questions at the start of the first episode, so be sure to answer those and leave your comments down below as well if you haven't already. So without further ado, let's get underway. So the first thing you need to do before even getting to the sport, especially if it's a team sport, is to actually choose a team. If it's not a team sport, choose a certain individual athlete that you like. It's much easier if you tie it to your, I guess, nationality or country that you come from. So you have a bit of a kind of relation there. But choosing your team will automatically give you kind of incentive to watch the team play. That way you kind of attach yourself to a certain brand. There's community behind that. And there's also obviously something to root for. When we are watching sports, we do appreciate the greatness that the athletes offer. But most of the time we want to have an attachment somewhere. And I think the main attachment comes from being part of a team, and being, like, I guess, coordinated with that and what, I guess, a team brings. And that's identity, together achieves more, something more than just being the regular sport fan. And the reason why I think picking a team is so important is because, as I said, you already have that attachment on board. You already have somewhere to be. So when I guess, started getting into sports, the first team I chose in the NBA was the Washington Wizards, and I'll tease something as to why I went for them in maybe a future episode. But I got into the Washington Wizards. I started supporting them. No particular reason, really. And there doesn't really need to be a particular reason, especially if you're picking a sport late. You just simply need to like the team that you're into. Whether it could be like a color. Maybe you visited the city one time. Maybe you enjoy the city, especially if you're not from the United States. You might just have a specific attachment to them. Or you might even just be a typical bandwagon and go for the team that's currently winning at the moment. But whatever, I guess, your choice is, it doesn't really matter at that point, because in the end, you're not really supporting the sport. So you're just kind of trying to find a way to get in. So once you choose your team, you already have that attachment there. You have something to look forward to. You have something to, I guess, have an achievement for, reach for the stars. And then it makes it easier to just go online and kind of just research your team, see who's playing, see how their fan base is, their history, and it's like a starting surface to kind of search into that new sporting experience. So when I decided that I wanted to go for the Washington Wizards, I started to had a look at like Twitter pages where they had the Washington Wizards forums, all the highlights and players that played, and I was able to instantly kind of get that attachment with the team because it was something that, okay, I'm going to watch the NBA, the Wizards are playing, so I might as well watch them, they're my team, I might as well try to support them and just see how things go. And I think your choice is up to you, but in the end, whatever team you choose, you're kind of stuck with them at that point. You can always change. I don't condone or recommend it, but I guess searching your team at the start just makes things a lot easier there. And then on the athlete side, I would suggest obviously choosing an athlete that you best resonate with. If it's an individual tennis star, if it's someone from your country, it makes things a lot easier. But if you were to choose an individual, even in sports, if you potentially, like there's a lot of people I know that support LeBron James. If you want to go into a team that has LeBron James in it, start putting yourself in that identity with that certain athlete. That way you're kind of immersed in that, you're following that person's journey, and you're creating a connection that, I guess, inspires you to support them. That way it's just, I guess, a lot easier for you to support. And then in the terms of, again, as mentioned, for the individual sports, having that certain athlete that's involved makes you kind of root for them more. You want them to succeed, and you kind of understand like their progress and journey, and then you feel like you're kind of involved in that. And that's probably the first one. I would definitely say, yeah, start with a team, get an identity going on with that. Make sure you kind of immerse yourself in that too. You can't just pick a team and then not support. You got to really support yourself. You got to really force yourself to, I guess, involve yourself into that. And this is for someone that wants to get into a sport, but the way to get into it is to first have a connection with something in the sport. It can't just be the enjoyment aspect of it. You need to have something to look forward to when you watch the sport. So that's probably the first one. The second one, it's quite a generic one, but it also ties into those that actually don't play the sport. So first is to physically play it, give it a go, actually play the sport. Maybe you've played when you're a kid, but I think playing the sport is something that kind of gets you involved in it more, because you kind of really, immerse yourself. In the end, when we're growing up, we're playing our sports, and that's how we get into it, and that's how we kind of create that connection. But we also understand how the sport is played. So just go and play with a friend. It doesn't really matter what level, doesn't matter where. Just give the sport a go. And if you're someone that doesn't think they're good enough to play a sport, has tried the sport, doesn't enjoy playing it, but wants to support it, I'd highly recommend going to watch a local match. And what difference is for, I guess, going to a local match instead of going to a professional match is that the environment is a bit more, I guess, secluded, a bit more intimate, and you kind of feel like you're involved in the action more than you are on a professional standpoint. And if you find the sport boring, I feel like local sports breaks the bridge between that. There has been so many times where I've just been to a local basketball game, I've watched a mate play, or to a local game down the road of cricket, and I found myself thoroughly enjoying that, because there might be a case where I've actually known a person playing, so I'm actually supporting them instead of the sport itself, and really kind of getting into kind of that athlete. And it ties back to the first point that I mentioned, when choosing a team or an athlete, there's a reason for me to, I guess, choose that figure or that person to support. And when you start kind of like watching it, just really focus on how the game is played, what actions are taking. And it's a lower level too, so the game is not as professionally sound, so it's more slow. You understand how rules are played. You might have someone there locally that will explain it to you. You might have people that you're mates with, and you can just have that kind of social experience as well going there. Because especially with American sports, it's very hard to kind of watch NBA physically. You can go watch the NBL. I do recommend that. But having that local game just makes it a bit more intimate and fun too. And the best thing about local games as well is when there's halftime or something, you just go up there. Just if you're not keen on playing, but if you want to play, take some shots, get yourself immersed into it, and I guess have that open mind too. That's the key thing. Like getting into a sport, everyone is kind of scared of doing it, but it's because they're not really going in with 100% effort. And once you get in with that 100% effort, it makes things a lot easier there. So far we've touched on choosing a team and either playing with a person or a friend, or playing the sport, or watching a local game. So those two are kind of quite generic, and I think pretty obvious when it comes to supporting a sport. But again, some things that need to be taken into consideration as well. The next two that I'm going to mention are a bit more outside the box, and I really feel as though that will be the driving force for you to really take over the sport and actually get into it. And we're going to start with the third one, and that's playing fantasy sports. And I can talk a lot about fantasy sports because I am a massive fan of it. And I don't promote gambling, but I do say if you put money into it, it does help you kind of get into it more, makes you stay focused and driven. So whether you play for free, whether you play for gambling, please gamble responsibly, but also consider fantasy sports. And the reason why I say fantasy sports is, for those that don't know what fantasy sports are, essentially you choose your team. There are some sport codes that you have a certain budget and you pay players based on that budget and their price to create the team that you have. And then there's also a draft system where you go into a draft, you choose the best players ranked 1 to the end, and it kind of just goes in order there. The best thing about the fantasy thing is that, one, you're playing with your friends. So first of all, you actually are invested in the sport without even knowing the sport, because you are playing and versing your friends or just random opponents if you decide to do online. So you already have that kind of competitive edge and that competitive drive to want to win and do something. And how that immerses into sport is that you're actually needing to watch the sport to understand the knowledge of the sport, to choose the right players to beat the certain player. So if you're new to sport, if you don't know how to get into it, or if you've just started playing local sports, or if you've just started getting into your team, the next best step would be to join a fantasy league. So when you join a fantasy league, once you're in the league, you're obviously choosing your team, and it gives you that research to understand the players as mentioned. Then, because of that, you're able to really get a grasp of the players that are in your fantasy team, and you have those attachments with those players, but you're also having a look at other people's teams and how they're going because of the points that are generated there. Fantasy does a very good job in identifying who the better players are when it comes to the stats, the goals, or depending on what type of sport, goals, stats, buckets, etc. So you're able to really check who's playing good or who's playing bad. With basketball, it's very fun because you're able to see it every day. You go on the app, you check your scores. You can also check other people's scores. You also have people on the waiver wire that you can pick up. So it's very easy to get into new players and understand which players to go. Then you have left with no choice but to really watch and see how players are going to get yourself into it. Me personally, getting into fantasies has been the funnest thing. And I pretty much play all fantasy comps, and let me tell you, it's an investment and a half, especially when you have certain players that perform or underperform. It becomes very, very rocky and ridey as well. But it also brings that camaraderie with your friends. So when you play fantasy, you're obviously in a group of friends, in a group of people that you engage with. And it's pretty awesome too, because you're competing, you're knowing who the players are in your sport, you're understanding it, and you really have to force yourself to get into it. And that's why, again, as I mentioned, gamble responsibly. But having a little bit of money, putting a little bit of money in with a chance to win money back will obviously give you a bit more incentive to really try and get into that sport as well. Because I know for the fantasy comps that I run and fantasy comps that I'm in, I chuck in about $20 to $50. And if I win, I end up getting a little over $500 if I win the fantasy competition. So for me, that's pretty cool. It keeps me engaged. I obviously have community with my friends. We're able to communicate and talk about fantasy. And there's also a lot of social engagement because in some fantasies, you can actually trade players. There's a lot of resources online to immerse your skills and see which players are good and bad. And it's just very easy to unravel the sport because, one, you're competing, so you have no choice. And two, you're putting yourself into a game that you obviously have to play because you're in it. So again, though, that fantasy one is probably one that I would 100% recommend any new sport fan doing, especially going into a new sport. And I know it can be daunting. A lot of people will say, oh, but I don't know the sport. Oh, I'm not playing because I don't know. Fantasies are unlimited. So maybe you might not do good the first season, but you can always improve. And let me tell you, for someone that knows a lot about sports or likes to think they know a lot, isn't doing too well in his current fantasy league right now. So you don't have to necessarily be the best or the most smartest to choose the fantasy players. You just really need to kind of just be lucky as well with injuries and things. But also just have a certain basic knowledge, and you take learnings in going into future years as well. So I think without fantasy, I wouldn't have known pretty much all the NBA roster. Last year, I got into NFL, and it was my first time, and somehow I made it to the final, and I couldn't tell you half the roster. But now, ever since I got into NFL fantasy, I like to think I know pretty much most of the main offensive threats for each team and pretty much all the quarterbacks. So it's awesome to have a fantasy sport app or a game to really get yourself into it. And it kind of just helped me across my journey of getting into sports as well. So definitely recommend getting into fantasy. I 100% recommend it. And I think that's something that with AFL, if you're new to AFL, giving that a go, or for next season, considering new sports that you want to get into. There's fantasies for everything right now. So just look on Google, find the fantasies. Even if you don't have any mates that want to get into it with you, there's so many groups on Facebook. There's so many groups online that have different fantasy groups that you can, I guess, meet new people and engage with them as well, and kind of, increase your kind of sport fandom. So that's what we want here, and that's what the Huddle Within is offering at the moment, is being able to kind of just see different sports and unravel the depths and join communities and communicate and bring what we love together in the forefront. So definitely recommend fantasy basketball there, or fantasy sports for that matter. So I would say this one is probably my personal favorite and probably the most effective when it comes to getting into sports. And it would be to watch as many documentaries as possible. Documentaries are unbelievable when it comes to learning a new sport and getting into a new sport. Reason being is because it goes real into depths of what the sport is. And that's all what we're putting on this podcast theme. And the reason why documentaries are so important, because you attach the athlete's personal or team's personal life into the sport. We want to be inspired. We want to connect. We want to be involved. And what better than seeing raw footage of, I guess, sporting teams and how they cooperate behind the scenes, or inspiring athletes that have gone through the rut, or even, as negative as it sounds, the negative publicity documentaries that talk about a team or a player. For example, one unbelievable documentary to watch if you want to get into soccer, it has to be David Beckham's documentary, as most recent. An unbelievable display of professionalism, the way it was conducted. It really showed how much David Beckham went through. Like, to be honest, if anyone I know, or any athlete that went through the shit that Beckham went through and was still able to get out of that, is simply inspiring. Like, he literally had the whole country against him and still managed to have perseverance and strength to be able to remain as a professional, win the likes of the England fans back, and continue to be an elite footballer. And that came from his childhood, which they dived into. So we had that kind of connection with him as a kid. We saw how he got up, and we saw him kind of, I guess, rise through the fame as the documentary showed. We had the Last Dance documentary of Michael Jordan. I'm pretty sure any single sports fan would have watched that. You could see the behind-the-scenes footage. You could understand the mind of the greatest basketball player of all time. In my opinion, I'm not going to go into no GOAT debates as here, but in my opinion, one of the greatest players to ever play basketball, show his mentality and life through the game, and it really just showed the footage. A lot of other soccer documentaries that are good are the last, like City Till I Die, Sunderland Till I Die, Tottenham Till I Die, all those. Unbelievable, shows those behind the scenes kind of communications and things with the coaches, things that we don't really see in the surface level. That's why documentaries are so good, because they're able to show every single thing. If you're an NFL fan, the one that I would 100% recommend is Last Chance U. Last Chance U is unbelievably fantastic because it talks about young, aspiring NFL players that are in JUCO level. So for those that don't know what JUCO is, it's essentially kind of junior college. That's where they have been obviously put into, and it's essentially their last chance, as the title says, to be able to make it to a Division 1 school where you're eligible to be drafted. The reason why most of these players start from JUCO is issues with what they've had in high school when it comes to their kind of personal lives and their struggles. Most of them obviously being from Div 1 prospects and then finding out that they've gone through some certain things and then they've ended up being forced to play in JUCO. So this is their opportunity to do one last chance to get into the NFL. You see all the coaches, you see their journeys, you live through their lives, and you kind of really start rooting for the team. Like, especially I think it was season 4 with one of the wide receivers. His name was Dior. Unbelievable story. He literally was living in a car during his whole JUCO time and wasn't really getting along with his dad, had issues with his dad, and he played such a team-sacrificing effort, and eventually the outcome that he got was rewarding. And that's what you see, and that's what we love about it. And it just made me want to get into the sport more because it showed really the journey that it takes for some athletes to get to where they are and get to where we can kind of watch them perform at a professional level. And that was just honestly extremely awesome to see. So documentaries are unbelievable when it comes to that. Also, people that just really like drama and stuff. I know I touched into it before, but if you want to see some drama, if you're curious to understand some controversies, they also do help to some extent. But it really provides raw, unseen footage of, I guess, what the sport is meant to be. And if you look at probably the biggest example that I haven't touched on, the Formula One documentary literally gained so many new people because we were able to really have a connection with the drivers. We really saw what happened behind the scenes. And that's the most important thing. And that's why I'm trying to, I guess, do this podcast and make you look at, is that when we really have an attachment with something or someone, that's when we get into it. And documentaries really show that. And it just proves that when you have a connection, when you get along with someone that's in your shoes, when you see that an athlete like you has gone through shit, has gone through life, and then they end up making a name for themselves, it's truly inspiring. And of course you want to support that. Of course you want to root for that team. Of course you want to root for that person to be successful because it gives you that motivation in your life to be successful as well. So that's why I honestly recommend documentaries as probably the most important and personally my favorite way of getting into a new sport. It really made me get into them. Like, I'm not even lying to you. When it came to Formula One, I got into it due to the documentary. When it came to NFL, it came from Last Chance U. What made me love the basketball and make me shift to a different perspective was the Michael Jordan documentary. I come from, I guess, starting as a soccer player, looking at David Beckham's road to fame and fighting through adversity. It inspires me to fight through adversity. It inspires me to go through life. So this is why I think documentaries are fundamental when it comes to getting into a new sport. And even if you don't like the sport, you will find things that you like within that. And it might make you just look into a new sport as well. But again, documentaries, must. And probably the last one that doesn't really get, I guess, the spotlight like the other 4. It's very simple and basic. It's to keep an open mind. Now, it's very hard to get into a new sport, understandably, especially if you haven't grown up playing it, especially if you have your kind of life fully busy and fully capped. But again, if you really want to get into a sport, the main thing to do is to keep an open mind. And when I say keep an open mind, is try to look at the positives within that sport. Yes, there is a lot of sports that are extremely boring. There are some sports that people don't like or dislike no matter how they try. But have they tried to look into the positive perspectives of it? Have they related it to their lives? Have they respected the athletes for trying to conduct that sport? Because I'm telling you, I don't love golf, but I can respect it because I can see the difficulty it has when competing with it. So when I am tuning into golf here and there, I like to personally just keep my mind open and say, look, these guys are driving the ball literally 400 plus meters and are hitting the green. Like, that's awesome. That's so cool. And they are the best in the world at what they do. Olympics is a massive example. A lot of people don't like watching the Olympics, but I take pride in watching the Olympics because I see sports that I probably never watch, but I look and think, wow, that's really crazy what they're doing. Like diving, for example, you can say, oh, diving is boring, but there's literally people that are diving 10 meters up in the air, doing 100 gazillion flips, and not even getting a single splash of water. I remember like 3 weeks ago, I went to some Turpin Falls with my mates and I jumped 15 meters off and I reckon I took out half the water in the lake. And these divers are going off the same distance and are literally not even splashing the water. Even with, especially the synchronized, at the same time they're jumping over. Archery, you got 15 meters, 20 meters fucking archery lengths driving all the way to the end, and they're hitting the fucking middle, man. Like, can you fathom that? Can you imagine, like, you just grabbing an archery right now, fucking grabbing the archery, swinging it up, and trying to hit a bullseye from fucking 20 meters away? It is incredible. And that's the thing. Keep an open mind. Look at the incredible things within the sport. You're telling me if you have not watched the sport, or if you've watched the sport, you haven't seen something incredible in that. That's how it draws so many fans. And that's what makes it amazing, man. Even basketball. If you don't like basketball, go watch Anthony Edwards slam dunk a ball. Go watch one poster and tell me how unbelievable it is. WWE, it's fake. Watch a guy go through a fucking table and tell me you don't think that's amazing how he gets up. Boxing, UFC, certain knockouts, unbelievable. These moments create the sport, and it creates just that shock factor and that love. And just keep an open mind with that. You don't necessarily have to sit there and pretend to enjoy the whole thing, but just take notes of stuff that is special within it. Even if you're not liking the sport as well. Okay, there's one massive example of this. I personally like it, but there's a lot of people that think darts is shit. Mate, let me tell you, the fans and the atmosphere that the darts have are simply bloody incredible. I could sit there watching the chants the whole fucking time I watch darts before even getting into that. So that's something to look into too as well. Like, really just have that gauge and open. And sorry for a bit of the swearing at the end. I just started to get a bit more passionate about this subject, about the open mind, because I'm really thinking in my head, wow, how amazing, I guess, sport really is. And that's kind of why I made this list, because one, keeping an open mind, two, getting into the other things, but it's just an amazing product, and it's a grace to be able to, I guess, watch sports and appreciate greatness when it comes to it. So that's 5 ways to, I guess, learn and get into any new sport. And I really had fun with this one. You could see I got a bit crazy at the end, but remember to first choose a team, get yourself attached to something. If it's not a team, it's a certain athlete or individual, especially if it's an individual sport. The second one is to physically play the sport or attend a local sport game. If you need friends to play with, if you don't have any to play with, attend a local sport. Even if it's not your own, just go around the corner. I'm sure there's some local games happening around your place. The third one is to join a fantasy league. Always gamble responsibly, so make sure if you're putting money, you understand your limit. And if you're not putting money, try to invest yourself into it. It gives you that opportunity to, I guess, get into the players versus your friends and have kind of like that competitive spirit involved as well. The fourth one, and my personal favorite, is to watch documentaries just to see the athlete's journey or a team's journey behind the scenes and kind of get that more depth level of, I guess, the competition, the sport, and the team camaraderie or the individual's journeys. And then the last and I guess most important one, to be honest, is to have an open mind and to really just take the positives in the sport, witness the greatness, appreciate the greatness, and who knows, maybe you might love that sport more than others. I know for me, I kind of just mix around with which sport I like. At the moment, it's been NFL. The season's over now, but it might be AFL again. Then it's been WWE. It's been just a mixture of things. I know different sports can be very seasonal. It doesn't help when you support Manchester United, let me fucking tell ya. But nevertheless, I still really enjoy all kind of sports, and I try to, I guess, personally take little bits and things of what I like about each sport as well. And I'm someone that, I guess, is open to things, and that kind of helps as well. But I guess that's where the enjoyment comes from. But anyway, it's been a really hot day today, so my room is steaming, and I'm gonna hit the cold showers and sign off for episode 3. But really appreciate you guys for tuning into this one, and keen to catch yous on the next one. Cheers. That's a wrap for this week's episode of the Huddle Within podcast. I appreciate you for tuning in and being part of the community where we go beyond the game into what really matters. If this episode resonated with you, make sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who sees sports just the way that we do. And hey, I'd love to hear from you. Connect with me on my social medias, which will be linked down on the episode below and also into the podcast description. Send in your thoughts or even be part of a future episode. Until next time, keep that passion alive, stay in the huddle, and remember, it's always deeper than the game. Until next time, cheers.